She promised childless couples miracles, but the newborns never reached their new homes. In 1886, the swamps of Louisiana hid a chilling secret: a midwife who promised childless couples miracles. She swore she could give them the children they had been desperately yearning for. But the babies she delivered never reached their new homes. Instead, they were sold to a grotesque circus where their lives were exploited for profit. The town had no idea, and the midwife's charm masked a horrifying truth. This isn't just the story of a cruel betrayal, but a tale of twisted greed and unimaginable horror that no one saw coming. The small, secluded town nestled deep within the Louisiana Bayou seemed like the kind of place where everyone knew everyone's business, or so they thought. At the heart of the town lived a midwife, a woman who was both revered and feared. Her name was Marguerite Dubois, but to the locals, she was simply the miracle woman. For years, she had been the one to turn childless couples' dreams into reality. Whether it was the young, heartbroken wife longing for a baby, or the elderly couple whose last hope rested on the faintest possibility of becoming parents, they all came to her with one request: a miracle. It wasn't that Marguerite had any medical training. No, her gift was something far more mysterious. She was said to possess ancient knowledge passed down through generations, forgotten techniques, secret herbs, rituals that only she knew. Her reputation had spread far, beyond the Bayou, attracting desperate families from all over Louisiana. She was a woman of grace and composure, always dressed in black, with a gaze that seemed to pierce right through a person. When she looked at you, you felt as though she could see the very soul inside, and it was that gaze that kept people coming back. For those who sought her help, she was a beacon of hope, a last chance for those who had given up on ever having children. Marguerite had a calmness about her that was contagious. She never rushed, never made false promises. She simply spoke with confidence, telling the couples that their dreams could become a reality if they trusted her, and trust they did. For many, she was their last hope. It was a quiet afternoon when the first couple came to see her. Amelia and Thomas, a young couple from New Orleans, arrived at her cottage deep in the bayou. Amelia was in her late 20s, her face a mixture of hope and desperation. She had been trying to conceive for years, and every attempt had ended in heartbreak. After so many failed treatments and endless disappointment, she was ready to give up. But a friend had told her of Marguerite, the miracle worker who could make the impossible possible. "Please," Amelia begged as she sat across from Marguerite. "We have tried everything. We just want a child. I can't bear to see the pain in Thomas' eyes anymore." Marguerite listened intently, her hands folded in her lap, nodding ever so slightly as she absorbed every word. Her gaze never left Amelia, as if she could feel the woman's sorrow as if it were her own. "I can help you," Marguerite said simply, her voice as smooth as velvet, "but it will come at a price." Amelia and Thomas exchanged a look. They had heard of such promises before, of course. So many others had claimed to possess miraculous powers, but none had been able to deliver. Yet there was something about Marguerite, something about the way she spoke, the way she made them feel that this time perhaps things would be different. "What is the price?" Thomas asked, his voice a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Marguerite leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I will give you the child you desire, but you must trust me completely. You must not ask questions about how it will come to you, only that it will. Are you willing to pay that price?" Amelia didn't hesitate. "Yes, whatever it takes." And with that, Marguerite made her promise a promise that would soon prove to be far darker than they could ever have imagined. Days later, the couple was called back to the cottage. Marguerite had prepared everything. The room was dimly lit, with strange herbs and unfamiliar symbols scattered about. Amelia felt a sudden unease, but she didn't question it. She had already given her word. The birth was quick, much quicker than anyone could have expected. Amelia lay on the bed, her body trembling, not from pain but from something else, something she couldn't quite place. Marguerite's hands were steady and confident as she guided the process, and within hours, a baby was born, a girl. But just as Amelia began to hold the child in her arms, Marguerite quickly took the baby from her, cradling it carefully, and gently placed the child into a woven basket beside the bed. "She will need to be taken away for a time," Marguerite said, her voice calm, almost soothing. "I will see to her care, but for now, she must rest." Amelia's heart sank. "What do you mean? Just hours. We've been waiting for so long." But Marguerite's eyes, that piercing, knowing gaze, silenced her before she could protest further. "Do not worry, Amelia. The child will come to you in due time. Trust me." For a brief moment, Amelia hesitated, but then she saw the soft glow in Marguerite's eyes, a calm that put her at ease. What harm could come from just a little more time? She had waited this long. What was a few more days? It was that moment of hesitation that would haunt her forever. Days passed, then weeks, but the baby never returned. At first, Amelia and Thomas thought it was simply a matter of timing. Marguerite had told them that everything had to be perfect for the child to join them, but as the days stretched into weeks and then months, they began to worry. Amelia went to Marguerite's home once again, desperate for answers. She found her midwife sitting calmly at her table, sipping tea as though nothing were amiss. "Where is my child?" Amelia demanded, her voice shaking. "We trusted you. You promised us." Marguerite stood slowly, her face expressionless. "The child is where she belongs. She is being cared for in the way she needs to be." But Amelia saw the glint in her eyes, a coldness that chilled her to the bone. "Where is she?" Amelia repeated, her voice now trembling with fear. Marguerite's smile was small but unsettling. "Your miracle was never meant for you, Amelia. It was meant for someone else." Before Amelia could respond, Marguerite turned away, and the room seemed to close in on her. That was when Amelia realized the terrible truth. The child she had begged for, the child she thought she had been promised, had never been meant for her at all. Her miracle was nothing more than a lie. But the deception didn't end there. The truth about what really happened to the baby would unravel something much darker than anyone could have imagined. The weeks that followed were a blur of confusion and growing dread for Amelia and Thomas. Every attempt to contact Marguerite met with a chilling silence. The midwife's once reassuring calm had turned into something more elusive, something unshakable. They had been told to trust her, to believe that the child they had been promised would come to them in time. But time was running out, and so was their patience. Amelia's thoughts were consumed by one question: where was their child? In the back of her mind, she had tried to reason with herself. Perhaps the midwife was right. Maybe there were complications, delays in the process that could not be explained. But every passing day turned the hope into something darker, a feeling of unease that wrapped around her heart like a cold vice. Amelia couldn't shake the feeling that she had been deceived, that the baby they had been promised was nothing more than an illusion. It was then, on an evening heavy with tension, that they decided to visit Marguerite once again. Thomas, ever the skeptic, had grown increasingly uneasy with each passing day. The same questions played on his mind: where was the child? And why hadn't the midwife allowed them to see her? The night before their visit, he had a restless sleep filled with images of shadows and strange whispers. He woke in a cold sweat, knowing something wasn't right. When they arrived at Marguerite's home the next morning, there was a sense of quiet foreboding. The cottage, which had once exuded a peaceful calm, now felt oppressive. The scent of strange herbs and pungent oils lingered in the air, the same as it always had. But there was something off about the stillness, something unsettling in the air. The sound of silence seemed too loud, too intense. Marguerite greeted them with the same practiced smile, but it was thinner, colder. "I've been expecting you," she said, her voice smooth, almost mechanical. "Where is she?" Amelia demanded before even entering the cottage, her voice raw with desperation. "Where is our baby? You promised us she would be here." Thomas stood by, his jaw tight with frustration, his hands clenched into fists. His mind raced, 1,000 thoughts firing off at once, but his mouth was dry. He couldn't seem to speak. All the fear he had been suppressing now surged to the surface. They had been lied to, but by whom? Was it Marguerite, or was there something deeper, something far more sinister at play? "Please, Marguerite." Amelia's voice softened as she stepped closer. "We've trusted you. We believed in you." Marguerite's eyes flickered for a brief second, a strange glint crossing her features. She didn't look at either of them as she spoke next. "I told you the child needed time. You must be patient. All things come in their own time." "But it's been months." "We've waited long enough," Thomas spat, his frustration now bubbling over. "We demand to know the truth." The midwife's expression shifted. The warmth in her face faded, replaced by something colder, more calculating. "You don't understand," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "There are forces at play here that are beyond your comprehension. The child you sought is part of something much larger than you. You would do well to let go of this obsession. It's dangerous. Dangerous," Amelia whispered, her breath catching in her throat. "What are you talking about?" Marguerite's gaze hardened. "You've made a deal with forces that you cannot control. The child you wanted is not meant for you. She was never meant to be yours." Thomas felt his heart drop. "What are you saying?" His voice was barely above a whisper, fear creeping into his words. "The child was sold." Marguerite's voice was cold now, her eyes hard like ice. You were never the parents she was destined for. The promise I made was never for you. Your desperation led you to make a pact that neither of you can undo. Amelia's legs nearly gave out from beneath her. Her vision blurred, her mind reeling. You sold our child? She whispered, barely able to form the words. Marguerite didn't answer. She didn't need to. The silence hung in the air, thick with truth. Amelia's blood ran cold. But just as the enormity of the revelation settled in, the front door of the cottage slammed open. A figure stepped inside, tall, cloaked, and dripping with the dampness of the swamp outside. Amelia and Thomas froze. It was a man they didn't recognize, his features obscured by the hood of his cloak. But the air in the room shifted the moment he entered, heavy and suffocating. Marguerite's demeanor changed in an instant. She straightened, her shoulders stiffening. You shouldn't be here. The man's voice was low, but it carried a weight of authority that made the hairs on the back of Thomas' neck stand on end. The deal is done, Marguerite. You've been paid, and now you must honor your part of it. Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. What is going on? Who is this? The man didn't even look at her. His cold eyes remained fixed on Marguerite. You've done well, but your work isn't finished. Marguerite nodded slowly, as though resigned to something inevitable. It will be taken care of. Thomas felt a surge of panic. Who are you? What have you done with our baby? But before the man could respond, a strange noise came from the shadows, soft, a sound that was almost a whisper, but unmistakable. It was a child's cry, faint but unmistakably real. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. The sound came again, distant, but so clear that it pierced through her like a blade. Marguerite, for the first time since they entered, turned to face them fully. The child you wanted, Amelia, is no longer yours to claim. You must leave. But as the door slammed shut behind them, and the sound of that distant cry echoed in the distance, they knew one thing for certain: they had just stepped into something far darker than they could ever have imagined. As they stepped out into the thick, oppressive air of the bayou, the horrifying truth of what they had just learned began to sink in. But the nightmare was only just beginning. Someone else was waiting, someone who knew the truth about their child and the price they had unknowingly paid. Amelia and Thomas had no choice but to leave Marguerite's cottage, but the weight of what they had just learned pressed down on them like a 1,000-pound stone. Their once bright world, filled with the promise of parenthood, was now a twisted nightmare. The baby they had waited for, the child they had been promised, was gone. And worse, it seemed that their desperation had unknowingly played a role in her disappearance. The unsettling cry they had heard echoed in their minds as they stumbled through the thick swamp, barely aware of their surroundings. The bayou, which had once seemed like a peaceful haven, now felt suffocating, as if the very air around them was tainted by the horrors they had uncovered. What do we do now? Thomas' voice trembled, barely audible over the rustling of the trees. His face was pale, his eyes wild with fear. Who was that man? And what was he talking about? Sold? How could she have sold our baby? Amelia couldn't speak. The enormity of it all weighed too heavily on her. Her mind raced, thoughts colliding like thunder in a storm. She had trusted Marguerite. They had trusted her with everything: their hopes, their dreams, their love for a child they had never even held. And now, it seemed that trust had been shattered. There was no returning from this. Not now, not after what they had learned. Then, through the haze of their confusion, they heard it again. A child's cry. This time, it was louder, more distinct, and it wasn't coming from the cottage. It was coming from the circus tent, the large, looming structure they had noticed on the outskirts of town when they first arrived in the bayou. The circus had come to town just days before, and it seemed out of place, as if it didn't belong. It wasn't the sort of lively show one would expect. There was something dark about it, an aura of mystery and dread that clung to it like a shadow. Without speaking, Amelia grabbed Thomas' hand and pulled him toward the source of the sound. They made their way through the thick underbrush, their feet sinking into the damp earth. The circus was set up near the edge of the swamp, far enough from town to make it seem isolated, but close enough that the cries of the children could still be heard. As they approached the massive, tattered tent, a cold wind swept through the trees, carrying with it the faintest smell of smoke and decay. Amelia could barely breathe, her chest tight with fear. What were they about to discover? What had happened to the child they had been promised? The entrance to the tent was dark and uninviting, guarded by a lone man who eyed them suspiciously as they neared. His appearance was unsettling, a tall, gaunt figure, with eyes that seemed to glimmer in the dim light. His clothes were ragged, stained with dirt and the remnants of something darker, something they couldn't quite identify. "What do you want?" the man asked, his voice gruff. "We're looking for someone," Thomas said, trying to keep his voice steady. "A child, a baby. It's ours. She's been taken." The man's expression flickered for a brief moment, then he smirked, as if amused by their desperation. "You think you'll find what you are looking for here? This is a circus, not a nursery. Go home." But Amelia's heart was pounding, and she couldn't stop herself from stepping closer. The sound of the child's cry had become more distinct, more insistent. It was the sound of a baby, alone, abandoned. "We're not leaving," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "Not until we find our child." The man sneered, his lip curling in contempt. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." He stepped aside, allowing them to enter. Inside, the circus was unlike anything Amelia and Thomas had ever seen. It was no carnival of laughter and bright lights, but a grotesque spectacle. The performers were strange, twisted in ways that no one should ever be. The air was thick with the smell of sweat, fear, and something more foul, like rotting meat. The lighting was dim, casting long shadows that seemed to dance on their own. The sounds of laughter and music were replaced by whispers, by muffled cries, by the sound of something more sinister moving in the darkness. As they ventured deeper into the tent, the cries grew louder. The sight that greeted them was one they would never forget. A young girl, no older than a few months, was lying in a cage at the center of the tent. Her tiny body was covered in rags, her face pale and gaunt. She looked as if she had been abandoned, left to cry out in vain for anyone to come and save her. Amelia's heart broke at the sight of the child. It was like looking into the face of their own lost baby. The resemblance was undeniable. "Who is she?" Amelia whispered, stepping closer to the cage. "She is one of the many," a voice said from behind them, and they turned to see the man who had been guarding the entrance. "This is what happens to those who end up here. The children who are sold, they don't belong to anyone anymore. They are part of the show now." Thomas' eyes widened with horror. "Sold? You're selling children?" The man nodded, his expression empty. "They're sold to the highest bidder. People like you, people desperate for what they can't have. You thought you could buy a miracle, but this is what you get instead. This is the price." Amelia felt like the world was crumbling beneath her feet. The baby in the cage, their baby, was a part of something far more horrific than she could have ever imagined. It wasn't just Marguerite who had betrayed them. It was this entire circus, this twisted operation built on the suffering of innocent children. But why? Thomas demanded. Why take them? Why sell them? The man's lips curled into a cruel smile. Because there's money in misery. There's power in selling people's hopes and dreams. And in this world, hope is the greatest currency of all. The words hit Amelia like a slap. She had been so blinded by her desire for a child that she had never stopped to question the cost. She had unknowingly stepped into a nightmare, one that had cost her far more than she had ever realized. As the man spoke, a figure stepped from the shadows, tall and imposing. The figure's eyes gleamed with an unnatural light, his presence sending a chill down their spines. He was the leader of the circus, the mastermind behind the operation, the one who had been pulling the strings all along. "You've come too late," the man said, his voice cold and calculating. "The child you seek was never yours to begin with. She was destined for something else. And now, she's mine." But as the leader of the circus stepped closer, revealing his true intentions, Amelia and Thomas realized that they weren't just fighting for a child anymore. They were fighting for their very lives. The nightmare was only beginning. The shadowed figure before them was every bit as menacing as Amelia and Thomas had feared. His eyes glimmered in the darkness, predatory and cold. The leader of the circus, the mastermind behind this twisted operation, was a man whose very presence seemed to drain the light from the room. He stood taller than they'd imagined, his face hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat that only revealed the sharp angles of his jaw and the cruel twist of his lips. "You've come to take back what was never yours," he said, his voice low and smooth, almost too calm for the situation. His gaze flicked from Thomas to Amelia, the weight of his words sinking into them like a stone. "We've come to stop this," Thomas said, his voice shaking with anger. "We won't let you do this anymore. We won't let you hurt any more children." The leader chuckled softly, almost as if amused by their misplaced courage. "You think you can stop what has been years in the making? What is already too far gone to undo?" He stepped forward, his eyes gleaming with an unsettling mix of amusement and contempt. "You're just one more couple caught in the web. You've been playing a part in this drama from the very beginning. The midwife didn't just choose you at random. You were chosen because you were desperate enough to be deceived." Amelia's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean? We trusted her. She promised us our child." The man's smile widened. "She promised you a child, yes, but the truth is that child was never meant for you. The midwife's role is to deliver the babies, the ones taken from the mothers who paid the price. But the real transaction happens here, in this circus. The children you wanted so badly, the ones who were meant to be your miracles, they are sold to the highest bidder. And you, he looked at them both with a predatory glint in his eye, you were never the end of the line. You were just the first buyers. Amelia's breath caught in her throat. You mean she began? But the words caught in her chest, the realization dawning far too late. Yes, he said, his voice cutting through the silence like a knife. The babies are nothing but currency to us. Once they are born, they are sold, exchanged, and used as living curiosities. We make a fortune off of people like you, desperate people. People who think they can buy their way into happiness. Thomas felt his stomach turn. His fists clenched, and his body trembled with the urge to lash out. But he knew it would be futile. This man, this monster, was too powerful, and they were just two people caught in a trap that had been carefully laid. You're lying, Amelia said, her voice barely above a whisper. This can't be true. You can't be serious. Oh, but it's true, the leader responded, his voice thick with malice. The truth is, you've been blinded by your own desire. The midwife knew exactly what she was doing. She knew you would want a child so badly you would pay any price, and you did. But now your child, the one you were so desperate to have, is just another part of the show. It's all for profit, all for control. Thomas stepped forward, anger flaring in his chest. How can you live with yourself? How can you do this to innocent children? The leader's face darkened, his eyes narrowing. Because I can. Because there are always people like you. People willing to sell their souls for something they can't have. You're not the first, and you won't be the last. Before they could respond, the man waved his hand, and from the shadows, a woman stepped forward. She was dressed in a dark, flowing gown, her face obscured by a veil. She moved like a shadow, silent and graceful. The moment she entered the light, Amelia felt a chill crawl up her spine. This, the leader said, nodding towards the woman, is Isabel. She's one of the many who work for me. She makes sure that our little acquisitions are well cared for. She ensures the process goes smoothly. Isabel's eyes glowed faintly in the dim light, her gaze fixed on the couple with an unnerving intensity. You should leave, she said softly, her voice like silk. The truth is not something you can undo. Once you're part of the system, you're trapped, just like everyone else. Amelia stepped back, shaking her head. No, we won't. Leave. Not until we have our child. Where is she? Her voice grew more desperate with each passing moment. The leader chuckled again, but this time there was something more sinister in his laugh. Your child is already gone. She's part of the show now, and if you want to see her again, you'll have to pay the price just like everyone else. He turned to Isabel. Prepare them. It's time for them to understand what they've gotten themselves into. Without another word, Isabel stepped forward, and before Amelia or Thomas could react, she snapped her fingers. The world seemed to tilt, and the air around them became thick, almost suffocating. In the blink of an eye, they found themselves standing in a different place altogether, a cold, dark room that smelled of dust and damp stone. The walls were lined with cages, each containing a child, some asleep, others staring blankly at the world around them, all of them young and vulnerable. This is the true cost, the leader's voice echoed through the room. This is where your child was taken. Amelia's heart shattered as she saw her baby, lying in a small wooden crib covered in a thin blanket. The child she had once held, the one she had thought was lost forever, was now just another piece of property in this horrifying game. No, Amelia whispered, her voice breaking. But the leader's words rang in her ears, growing louder and more intense, until they seemed to reverberate through her very bones. The deal is done, he said, and you can't change that. The child is mine now. You are just another part of the system, another cog in the machine. But as Amelia and Thomas stood there, powerless in the face of the nightmare, they realized that the only way to escape this horror wasn't through begging. It was through something far darker and far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Amelia stood in the cold, oppressive silence of the circus-hidden room, staring at her baby. The sight of her child lying in that cold wooden crib, surrounded by bars and the distant echoes of other children's cries, felt like a knife lodged deep in her heart. The leader of the circus had made it clear that the baby, her miracle, was now just another asset in a profit-driven nightmare. They had been deceived, betrayed by the very woman they had trusted, Marguerite, the midwife who had promised them a miracle, and now by the man who controlled it all. But the truth was more than just painful. It was suffocating. Amelia and Thomas had been pawns in a game much larger than they could have ever imagined. As the man's cold words echoed in her mind, she realized that their battle was far from over. This wasn't just about a stolen baby. This was about dismantling an entire operation built on lies and manipulation. Why are you doing this? Thomas' voice broke through the thick tension in the room. What's your goal? What do you get from all of this? Children shouldn't be used as commodities. The leader's lips twisted into a cruel smile. It's simple, really. People, like you, desperate to fulfill their deepest desires, will do anything, pay anything to get what they want. I give them a chance to take something they can never truly own. It's about control, about power. Amelia's hands trembled as she reached out to touch her baby, her fingers brushing against the cold bars of the cage. She wanted to scoop the child into her arms and run, to escape this nightmare. But as the leader stepped closer, the cruel reality hit her like a tidal wave. There was no escaping this, not now. Suddenly, a soft rustling noise came from the shadows. Another figure stepped into the dim light of the room. Amelia's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar face. "Marguerite," Amelia whispered, her voice thick with disbelief. The midwife stepped forward, her expression cold and unreadable. "I see you've met the mastermind behind this circus," she said, her voice void of any warmth. "Why?" Amelia gasped, her hands shaking as she pulled her baby closer. "Why did you do this? You promised us a miracle." Marguerite's face hardened, and for a brief moment, something flickered in her eyes. Regret? Guilt? No. She was beyond that now. "I never promised you anything," she said. "I gave you what you asked for, a child, but it was never meant to be yours." Thomas took a step forward, his eyes burning with anger. "You used us, all of us. You led us to believe in something that wasn't real. But why? For money? Power?" Marguerite met his gaze, unflinching. "Power is the only thing that matters. People like you, like me, we all use others to get what we want. The difference is, I know what it takes to survive in this world. You don't." Her words stung like a slap, and in that moment, it became painfully clear Marguerite wasn't just some misguided healer. She was a part of this sinister world, fully complicit in the exploitation of the innocent, driven by the same greed and lust for control as the leader of the circus. Amelia's mind reeled. How had they missed the signs? How had they been so blind? The midwife had never been the savior they thought she was. She was part of the system, a cog in the machine that fed on the hopes and desperation of people like them. But just as the weight of this realization began to settle over her, something even more shocking happened. Marguerite took a step closer, her expression softening for the briefest of moments. Then, without warning, she reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she touched Amelia's arm. "I didn't want this," Marguerite whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to become this, but there's no turning back now." The words hit Amelia like a sledgehammer. She had expected defiance, anger, but not this quiet, broken moment of vulnerability. For the first time since they met, Amelia saw the woman before her not as a manipulator, but as a person who, in her own way, had been trapped in the very system she helped perpetuate. Thomas, however, was not moved. He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "You had a choice. You chose to betray us, to betray everyone who trusted you." Marguerite's face hardened again, the mask returning. "And you had a choice too. You chose to walk into this trap. You chose to believe in something that could never be real. The truth is, you were never meant to win. None of you are." Amelia's heart hammered in her chest, but something inside her began to shift. She could feel the anger rising, burning hot like a flame inside her. The weight of the situation, the betrayal, all of it threatened to crush her. But the one thing she couldn't afford to do, the one thing she refused to do, was give up. "No," she said, her voice steady but firm. "We may have been misled, but we're not done. This stops now. You'll pay for what you've done." The leader of the circus stepped forward, his eyes narrowing in response to Amelia's defiance. "You think you can stop me? You think you can dismantle something that has existed for years? You're fools, all of you." But Amelia's resolve didn't waver. With one swift motion, she reached for the bars of the crib, gripping them tightly as she faced the leader. "You're right about one thing," she said, her voice rising. "We were fools, but we're done being your pawns, and we're done playing by your rules." In a moment of pure determination, she turned to Thomas, who nodded in agreement. They knew what had to be done. It wasn't enough to fight for the baby anymore. It wasn't enough to expose the lies. It was time to destroy the system, the circus, everything. Just as the leader opened his mouth to speak, there was a sudden crash from behind them. The sound of footsteps echoed through the tent, followed by the heavy thud of someone rushing toward them. Amelia's heart raced as the figure came into view, a man, tall and strong, wielding a large, heavy chain. It was one of the circus performers, but this time, he wasn't wearing the twisted smile of the other workers. "Get out of here," the man shouted, his eyes wild with panic. "Now, before it's too late." The moment of distraction was enough. Amelia and Thomas rushed toward the door, their hearts pounding in their chests, knowing this was their only chance to escape. As they fled into the night, the weight of their decision was heavy. The circus was no longer just a place of exploitation, it was a ticking time bomb, and Amelia and Thomas were about to become part of something much bigger than they ever could have imagined. Amelia and Thomas ran through the dense undergrowth of the swamp, their breath ragged and their hearts pounding in their chests. The circus, the lies, and the manipulation had overwhelmed them, but they had made it out, at least for now. The figure who had helped them escape, the mysterious performer with the heavy chain, had vanished into the shadows, leaving them with one unsettling thought: they weren't out of danger yet. The moonlight barely filtered through the thick trees, casting the swamp in a dark, oppressive haze. Every rustle of leaves seemed like a threat, every branch breaking underfoot like a warning that they were not alone. Amelia's mind raced. They had to find a way to expose the truth, to destroy the circus and everything it represented. But how? They were just two people against a vast, well-oiled machine of exploitation and lies. What could they possibly do? Thomas grabbed her hand, pulling her from the trance of fear. "We need to get to town. We need to tell the authorities, gather the evidence. We can't let them get away with this." But as they moved forward, a nagging feeling gnawed at Amelia. They had trusted Marguerite. They had trusted the midwife, the woman who had promised them a miracle. She had been the catalyst that led them into the nightmare that was the circus, and yet there had to be more to her story. Why had she helped orchestrate the sale of babies to the circus? What had driven her to become a part of this horrifying system? She wasn't just some greedy bystander. There had to be a deeper reason, something that tied her to it all. "We need to go back," Amelia said suddenly, her voice firm. "We need to find out what happened to her. There is more to this than just the circus. She's hiding something. She's been hiding something all along." Thomas hesitated, his brow furrowing in doubt. "What are you talking about? We barely escaped with our lives. Why would we go back to her? She's the one who betrayed us, the one who sold our child." Amelia shook her head. "I know, but we can't just leave it like this. She's the key. If we want to take down the circus, if we want to end this nightmare, we need to know everything about her, about how she's involved. We can't do this alone." Against his better judgment, Thomas nodded. They had no other choice. They had to face Marguerite one more time. But this time, they would be prepared. They would confront her, demand answers, and, perhaps most importantly, uncover the secrets she had been hiding. The moon hung high in the sky by the time they reached Marguerite's cottage. It was eerily quiet, far too quiet for comfort. The warm, welcoming aura of the house that they had once known now seemed cold and oppressive, like a tomb. But they pressed on, stepping cautiously toward the front door. They had come too far to turn back now. The door creaked open with a faint groan as they entered. Marguerite was nowhere to be seen, but there was a strange, unsettling feeling in the air, as though someone was watching them. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move on their own, and every creak of the floorboards made Amelia's heart race. Then, without warning, a voice pierced the silence. "You shouldn't have come back." Amelia and Thomas turned to find Marguerite standing in the doorway of the back room, her figure outlined by the dim light. She was dressed in her usual black, but there was something different about her. Her eyes, once cold and calculated, were now filled with an unmistakable fear. "Marguerite," Thomas said, his voice tight with anger. "What have you done? You've sold our child. You sold others too. Why?" Marguerite didn't answer immediately. She stood there, her hands trembling slightly as if struggling with her own thoughts. Then finally she spoke, her voice quieter than before. "I never wanted this," she whispered. "I never wanted to become part of this world. But once I was in, there was no way out." Amelia stepped forward, her heart pounding. "What do you mean? Why did you do it?" Marguerite lowered her head, as if ashamed of her own actions. "I was born into this," she said, her voice barely audible. "My mother, she was part of the circus. She sold babies too. She taught me how to manipulate, how to make people believe in things that weren't real. It was all about survival. I didn't know any other way." Thomas' anger flared. "That's no excuse. You betrayed us. You betrayed every family that came to you looking for help." Marguerite looked up, her eyes filled with a mix of regret and resignation. "I know. I know I failed you, but it wasn't just about money. The circus has power, Thomas, the kind of power that controls everything, and I needed that power. I thought I could help. I thought if I could work from the inside, I could protect the children, but I was wrong. I was too weak to stand up to them. And now it's too late. Amelia's chest tightened with a mixture of anger and pity. You were part of something horrible, but you can still stop it. You can help us take them down. Marguerite shook her head. You don't understand. The circus isn't just a show. It's a system that has been in place for generations. The people behind it control everything. The midwife, the buyers, the performers, they all answer to someone. Someone much more powerful than you can imagine, and I'm not sure even I can stop them. Suddenly, Amelia felt the weight of Marguerite's words sink in. It wasn't just a circus. It was a network. A deeply rooted, pervasive operation that stretched beyond anything they had ever seen. The circus wasn't just an isolated nightmare. It was part of something far bigger. Before they could ask more, the sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway. The door to the back room creaked open, and a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. It was the man from the circus, the one who had been part of the operation from the very beginning, the leader. You shouldn't have come back, Marguerite, he said, his voice dripping with malice. Marguerite's face drained of color. I had no choice. They can't keep getting away with this. The leader stepped forward, a cruel smile curling on his lips. You should have stayed where you belonged, Marguerite. Now, you've gone and made this personal. Amelia and Thomas exchanged a glance. They had been played, but now it was time to turn the tables. They couldn't let this man or the circus get away with it any longer. But as the leader stepped closer, revealing a chilling secret about his true identity, Amelia and Thomas realized that the war they had thought they were fighting was only a small battle in a much larger, much darker conflict, and they were about to learn just how deep the conspiracy went. The leader of the circus stood in the doorway, his cold, calculating eyes fixed on Amelia and Thomas. He smiled, but it wasn't a smile of triumph. It was a smile of someone who had already won. Behind him, Marguerite looked pale and resigned, her shoulders slumped in defeat. She knew what was coming. They all did. You should have stayed away, Marguerite, the leader said, his voice cold as ice. But now, you've gone and made this personal. Amelia felt a surge of anger, but it was tempered by the overwhelming realization that they were in far deeper than they had ever anticipated. This wasn't just about getting their baby back. This was about a conspiracy, a twisted system that had been operating for far too long, one that was now threatening to consume them completely. We won't stop, Thomas said, stepping forward. His voice was fierce, but there was an edge of desperation in it. We're taking you down, no matter what it takes. The leader chuckled darkly, stepping further into the room, his silhouette framed by the door. You think you can take me down? He sneered. I'm just one part of a much larger picture. You've been chasing shadows and now you're too late. There's nothing you can do. Amelia's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean? Who else is involved? Who are you working for? The leader's smile widened and he looked back at Marguerite. She never told you, did she? That Chez. Not the one pulling the strings. Marguerite's face twisted in guilt. I couldn't. I thought I could stop it, but I couldn't. I was too weak. Stop what? Thomas demanded, his frustration growing. What's really going on here? The leader turned to face them fully, his expression no longer mocking but darkly serious. You really don't know, do you? He said softly, his voice thick with disdain. You think the circus is just some sideshow? A traveling show that exploits children for money? No, it's much more than that. It's a front for an underground network of influence that controls more than just your little town. We've been running this operation for decades. And Marguerite, well, she has been one of the key players. Amelia's stomach churned. So it wasn't just the babies. You've been controlling people for years, manipulating them, using them for your own gain. The leader's eyes glinted with an unsettling satisfaction. Exactly. It's a machine. People like you, desperate for something they can't have, fall right into our hands. And once you're in, there's no getting out. The babies, the circus, they're just a small part of the bigger picture. The real money, the real power, is in the influence we control, the families we manipulate, the lives we ruin. Marguerite stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't want it to be this way. I thought I could help. I thought I could protect them. But I've only made it worse. The leader sneered at her. You were never going to stop this, Marguerite. You're too much of a coward to truly change anything. You've always been a part of it. You always will be. Amelia and Thomas exchanged a glance. This was worse than they could have imagined. The circus wasn't just an operation exploiting children for profit. It was a cog in a larger, insidious machine that controlled everything. The web was far bigger, far more complex, and the people behind it were not just criminals, they were power brokers. But there was something else in the leader's words that rang a bell. "What do you mean the real power is an influence?" Amelia asked, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. "Who else is involved?" The leader's smile faltered, just for a moment. "You still don't understand, do you? You've been digging in the wrong place. This isn't just about the babies or the circus. There are powerful people behind the scenes, people you'll never reach. They pull the strings. They make the real decisions." The air in the room felt colder, the weight of his words sinking into their bones. Amelia's mind raced. If there were even more powerful people involved, people beyond the reach of ordinary citizens, beyond what they could ever expose, what hope did they have? "We're just the start," the leader continued, his voice now almost affectionate in its cruelty. "There are others who have been doing this for far longer than you could ever imagine. The circus is just a small branch of a much larger network, and you've been caught in the crossfire." Suddenly, a terrifying thought flashed into Amelia's mind. "You're not working alone, are you?" she whispered, the realization hitting her like a blow. "You've been using the town, using Marguerite to set all of this up. Who else is behind this? Who's the real mastermind?" The leader's smile returned, darker than before. "You're very close, but you still don't know the truth." He stepped back, his arms spreading wide, as though he were unveiling a secret that had been kept hidden for years. "You've been chasing the wrong enemies. The truth you seek is not here. It's not in the circus. It's not in the midwife's office. The ones pulling the strings have been in power for far longer than you've known." Amelia's heart pounded. "Who are they?" she demanded. "Tell me who's behind this." But the leader only shook his head, his smirk never faltering. "That's a game you're never meant to win, my dear." And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the conversation came to an abrupt halt. The leader turned on his heel, walking toward the back of the room, his footsteps echoing in the silence. "You're too late," he called over his shoulder. "There's nothing you can do now. Your fate was sealed the moment you decided to interfere." As he disappeared into the shadows, the door slammed shut behind him, and Amelia and Thomas were left standing in the room, their hearts heavy with the weight of his words. The truth, the real truth, was even more terrifying than they had imagined. The circus, the midwife, and even the babies were only the surface of something much darker, much more dangerous. The clock was ticking, and if they didn't act fast, the people behind this operation would continue their control over everyone, including them. But just as they began to process what they had learned, a new voice echoed from the shadows, a voice they knew all too well, the voice of someone who had been in on this all along. The final twist was about to be revealed. The weight of the leader's words hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The truth was slipping through their fingers like sand, just out of reach. Amelia and Thomas stood in the room, their minds spinning. They had thought they were on the brink of uncovering everything, but the leader had revealed that there was something far more insidious behind it all. He had barely given them enough information to make sense of the mess, only to leave them with more questions than ever. "We've been chasing the wrong enemies," Amelia whispered, her voice barely audible. "We've been looking in all the wrong places," Thomas replied, his voice grim. They had thought they could expose the circus and the midwife, thought they could end the nightmare they had been thrust into. But the leader's final words had shattered that illusion. There was more at play here. There were people in power, people who were controlling the circus and the midwife, and they were far beyond the reach of two ordinary people like them. Amelia's chest tightened. But where do we go from here? We know they're part of something bigger, but we have no idea who these people are. Thomas shook his head, his eyes dark with frustration. "We can't just walk away. We can't let them get away with this. We have to do something." But the truth was, they were running out of time. The clock was ticking, and the deeper they dug, the more they realized they were up against an impenetrable force. Every move they made seemed to bring them closer to the heart of the darkness, but each revelation only raised more questions. "There's one thing we can do," Amelia said, her voice steadying. "We go to the town. We expose them. We tell everyone what's happening." But Thomas hesitated. "The town? You really think they'll believe us? After everything that's been happening, people are too afraid to speak up, let alone stand against the ones in power." Amelia's heart sank. He was right. The town was built on secrets. It was a place where everyone knew everyone's business, but no one ever questioned the ones who held the power. For years, the circus had been running its operation right under their noses, and Marguerite had been trusted by all, even after all the disappearances. The townspeople had turned a blind eye to the truth because it was easier to stay silent than face the consequences of the truth. The truth doesn't matter to them, Thomas continued. They've been living in denial. They've been content with the lies. But Amelia wasn't ready to give up. She knew they had no other choice. They had to fight. They had to expose the lies, even if the town didn't want to hear them, even if they couldn't see what was happening right in front of them. We can't let them continue. Not like this, she said. We'll make them see the truth, even if it takes everything we have. With renewed determination, they left the cottage and made their way toward the town square. It was dark, and the streets were empty, the silence deafening. The Bayou's oppressive air clung to everything, making each step feel heavier. But Amelia and Thomas pressed on. They were walking straight into a storm they had no idea how to survive. As they reached the center of town, they saw a small crowd gathered outside the tavern. The townspeople were talking in low voices, their faces cast in shadows. It seemed like the perfect moment to speak up, to reveal everything. But something in Amelia's gut told her that it wasn't going to be easy. "Do you think they'll listen?" Thomas asked, his voice laced with doubt. "We have to try," Amelia said, her voice steady. She took a deep breath, steeling herself for the confrontation. "We have to make them see what's been happening. We have to stop them." As they stepped into the crowd, a hush fell over the group. All eyes turned to them, and for a moment, it felt like the entire world was watching. Amelia felt the weight of their gaze, the pressure building in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the townspeople burning into her, waiting for an explanation. "Everyone, listen to me," she called out, her voice ringing through the silence. "What's been happening in this town is not what you think. There's a circus, and it's been exploiting children for years. People like Marguerite, the midwife, have been involved, and they've been selling babies to this circus for profit." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Amelia could see the disbelief in their eyes, the confusion, the fear. They didn't want to believe it. They didn't want to hear it. "This is madness," someone shouted from the back of the crowd. "You're accusing people who've lived here their whole lives. We've trusted Marguerite." Another voice spoke up. "She's been our healer for years. How can you say such things?" Amelia's heart sank. She had expected this. The townspeople were too entrenched in their trust for Marguerite, too blind to the truth that had been hidden in plain sight for so long. They didn't want to face the darkness in their own backyard. They didn't want to admit that they had been complicit in the exploitation. "They've been controlling us," Thomas yelled, his frustration rising. "The circus, Marguerite. They've been using you all. They've been controlling everything. You've been living in denial while children have been sold to that circus. It's happening right here." But the voices of doubt grew louder. "This is nonsense," another man called out. "You're trying to stir up trouble. Marguerite would never do something like that." Amelia's resolve began to crack. How could she convince them? How could she make them see the truth when they were so deeply in denial? And then, just as it seemed like all hope was lost, the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoed from the shadows. A figure stepped into the light, and for the first time since they had begun this journey, Amelia felt a glimmer of hope. It was someone she didn't expect, someone she thought was lost to the darkness. Marguerite. But this time, she wasn't the woman they had known. Her eyes were filled with something different: regret, guilt, and something else. Something that looked like a cry for redemption. "I'm sorry," Marguerite said, her voice raw with emotion. "I'm so sorry for everything." But as the truth began to unravel, the final twist sent shockwaves through the crowd. Marguerite wasn't just trying to protect them. She was about to reveal something far darker than they had ever imagined. The crowd fell silent as Marguerite stepped forward, her face a pale mask of regret. Her eyes darted nervously between Amelia and Thomas, and then to the townspeople who were still gathered around them. For the first time, Marguerite looked like someone who had been trapped, someone who had finally come face to face with the consequences of her actions. "I've been a part of something much worse than I ever imagined," she whispered, her voice shaky. "I thought I could change it, thought I could protect people. But I've only made things worse." The townspeople, still skeptical, exchanged glances. They didn't know what to believe anymore. Marguerite had been their trusted healer for years. She had been the one they turned to for comfort, for help. The idea that she had been part of something so monstrous, something so deeply twisted, was too much for them to process. "I don't know what to say," Marguerite continued, her eyes welling with tears. "But I'm ready to make things right. I've tried for years to bury the truth, to protect this town from what I've done. but I can't live with it anymore. It's time you all knew." Amelia's heart pounded in her chest. "What are you talking about, Marguerite? You've been part of this from the beginning. You helped sell those babies, sell our child. How can you expect us to believe anything you say now?" Marguerite shook her head. "You don't understand. I didn't just help them. I was trapped. They have power over everyone. The circus isn't the only part of it. The network behind it controls everything, and they've been doing it for decades. It's not just the babies, it's entire families. They target the most desperate, the most vulnerable, and they manipulate them into serving their agenda. I never had a choice. I thought I could protect them, but I was just a puppet. And now, they're coming for all of us." Thomas stepped forward, his anger boiling over. "Then help us! Help us stop them!" Marguerite's eyes flickered, but she didn't respond immediately. Then, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're coming. The people who really run this operation, they're coming for you now. You've stirred the hornet's nest, and they won't let you expose them." A chill ran down Amelia's spine. "Who are they, Marguerite? Who's really behind this?" Marguerite hesitated. "You don't understand. You can't just take them down. These people are untouchable. They control the money, the power. They've been doing it for years. They have people everywhere." Suddenly, a loud noise cut through the air, the sound of heavy footsteps approaching. The crowd tensed, and Amelia's heart raced. The tension in the air thickened as a figure emerged from the shadows. It was the leader of the circus. But this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, a group of masked men and women in dark cloaks stepped into the light. They were silent, their movements precise, like a well-trained army. The leader of the circus grinned as he stepped forward, his cold eyes fixed on Amelia, Thomas, and Marguerite. "So it seems the rats have come out of the shadows," the leader said, his voice dripping with contempt. "Did you really think you could expose us? Did you really think you could take down something that has been running for so long?" Amelia's stomach sank. This wasn't just a fight for justice anymore. This was a fight for survival. "You won't get away with this," Thomas said, his voice steady but filled with the same fear that gripped them all. The leader smirked, stepping closer. "You still don't get it, do you? You think you can stop us? You think you can stop a network that's been in place for decades? You're nothing but pawns in a game that's been played long before you came into the picture." Marguerite stepped forward, her voice shaking. "This ends now. It's over." But the leader only laughed. "It's never over. You've been living in a fantasy world thinking you could change things, but you're wrong. You've all been part of this system, and now you'll pay the price for your interference." Amelia's heart raced. They had no choice now. There was no way to talk their way out of this. The circus, the network, the power behind it all was all too big. And yet, they couldn't back down. Not now. Not when the truth was finally within their grasp. With a deep breath, Amelia turned to Thomas. "We can't let them get away with this. We have to fight." Thomas nodded. "Well, do whatever it takes." Just as the leader stepped closer, ready to give the signal to his men, Marguerite did something unexpected. She turned to face the leader, her face set in a grim line. "You don't understand," she said, her voice low but resolute. "I may have helped you once, but I won't anymore. I won't let you destroy these people." The leader's expression faltered for the briefest of moments, but his smirk quickly returned. "You think you can stop me? You've been a part of this from the beginning, Marguerite. You are just as guilty as the rest of us." But Marguerite's eyes were hard now, and for the first time, there was no fear in her gaze. "Not anymore. I've seen the truth, and am not going to let you win." Without warning, Marguerite pulled a small vial from her pocket and threw it to the ground. A blinding light erupted, blinding everyone for a moment. The leader and his men stumbled back, disoriented. Amelia and Thomas took the opportunity to run, grabbing Marguerite's hand as they bolted toward the exit. But just as they reached the door, the leader's voice rang out. "You think this is the end? It's just the beginning." As they fled into the night, Marguerite's cryptic words echoed in their minds. They had escaped for now, but the true fight was only just beginning, and the darkest secrets of the circus and the network behind it were still waiting to be revealed. The night was thick with tension as Amelia, Thomas, and Marguerite ran through the twisting paths of the Bayou. Their hearts pounded in their chests, adrenaline pushing them forward despite the fear gnawing at their insides. The sound of pursuit echoed in the distance, the leader's men still hot on their trail, but they couldn't stop now. They had to reach safety. They had to finish what they started. Amelia's mind raced as they darted through the swamp. What Marguerite had done, the vial, the blinding light, it had given them a chance to escape, but it had come at a cost. The leader was no fool. He would come after them, harder than ever, and they needed answers, more than ever, if they were to stand a chance. "Where are we going?" Thomas gasped, his breath ragged. "We need to get to the town hall," Amelia said. Her voice was firm, but beneath it, there was an undercurrent of uncertainty. "We have to expose everything. We have no choice." Marguerite stumbled beside them, her face pale. "The town will never believe you," she said, her voice shaking. "Not after everything that's happened. They've been in denial for too long. I tried to protect them, but it's too late." Amelia stopped, grabbing Marguerite's arm. "We can't stop now. We need to make them see the truth, no matter how impossible it seems." Marguerite's eyes filled with regret, but she nodded. "You don't understand. The people behind all this, they're not just in this town. They control everything. The town's denial runs deep. They'll stop at nothing to keep the truth hidden." The words hit Amelia like a punch. How could they fight an enemy that was so deeply entrenched in the town, an enemy who had control over every aspect of life here? What hope did they have against a force so pervasive, so powerful? But Thomas was not about to give up. "We don't need everyone to believe us," he said, his voice resolute. "We just need to make sure the truth comes out, one way or another." Suddenly, the sounds of footsteps grew louder. The pursuit was closing in. They had no more time. They had to act. "Get to the hall," Amelia yelled. "Go. He'll hold them off." Before Marguerite or Thomas could protest, Amelia turned and sprinted back toward the path leading into the trees, cutting through the underbrush with a wild, frantic energy. She needed to buy them time to get the truth out. She could hear the leader's voice, low and taunting, just behind her. "You can't run from this. You're nothing but troublemakers." Amelia's chest burned, her breath shallow. She didn't have the luxury of fear, not now. The moonlight sliced through the trees, illuminating the dense swamp as Amelia sprinted through the thick undergrowth. She was close now, closer to the clearing where the town hall was situated. She could hear the sounds of her pursuers growing louder, but she wouldn't stop. Not yet. Then, just as she broke through the trees, the world exploded in chaos. A flash of light, a powerful blast of energy sent her sprawling to the ground. For a moment, everything was blurred. She blinked rapidly, her mind struggling to make sense of what had just happened. There, standing in front of her, was the leader. His eyes gleamed with a cold, triumphant smile. "You really thought you could expose us?" he sneered, stepping closer. "You're nothing, just pawns in a game you can't even comprehend." Amelia struggled to her feet, her body shaking with a mix of fear and rage. "You're wrong," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "This ends tonight." The leader laughed. "You think I'm afraid of you? You've already lost. The power I hold is far beyond your understanding. You're already too late." Amelia glanced over her shoulder. Thomas and Marguerite were almost to the hall. They could still do this. They had to. They could end the circus, reign, expose the network behind it all. The truth would come out, no matter what it took. The leader reached out, grabbing her arm with a strength that made her gasp. "You've made a mistake, girl," he hissed, his breath foul against her skin. "You're not in control here." But just as his grip tightened, a sharp cracking noise echoed through the night. The leader's expression faltered, his grip loosening. He turned, confusion flickering in his eyes. And that's when Amelia saw it. Standing just a few feet away was the mysterious figure who had helped them escape earlier. This time, the figure was armed. In one hand, a large crossbow gleamed in the moonlight. In the other, a thick rope coiled, ready for use. Without a word, the figure fired the crossbow. The bolt struck the leader in the shoulder, sending him tumbling backward. He cursed loudly, struggling to pull the bolt free. But it was too late. The figure moved quickly, securing the rope around the leader's arms and binding him with practiced precision. "You're not going anywhere," the figure said, their voice cold and impersonal. Amelia's heart raced, but she didn't hesitate. She reached into her bag, pulling out a small piece of parchment, the evidence they had gathered over the last few days, the names of people involved, the addresses, everything. She ran toward the town hall, knowing they were running out of time. Inside, the townspeople were still gathered, confused and anxious. The noise of the struggle outside had raised their curiosity, but Amelia knew this was their chance. She slammed the door open, and every eye turned toward her. "Listen to me," she shouted. "The truth is here. The circus, Marguerite, the entire network, it's all part of a massive conspiracy. They've been exploiting children for years, and they've been hiding it right under our noses." The room fell silent, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "And we're not leaving until the truth is exposed," Amelia continued. "This town has been living in denial, but it ends tonight." The townspeople murmured, uncertain, but something had changed. The power of the truth was undeniable. The leader, now bound and helpless, glared at Amelia from outside the door. As the truth began to spread like wildfire, Amelia knew that while the battle had been won, the war was far from over. The full extent of the network was still out there waiting. But tonight, the first stone had been thrown. Final payoff. As the townspeople gathered around, the weight of the truth settled in. The leader, bound and helpless, could do nothing but seethe in silence. Amelia and Thomas had exposed the nightmare, but the battle wasn't over. The circus was just a small piece of a much darker network, a network that had controlled their lives for far too long. But tonight, the first cracks had appeared. Amelia knew the fight was far from over, but as the town began to rise against the darkness, she felt a glimmer of hope. The truth had won. For now.